Welcome, and thank you for sharing your afternoon with us. My name is Leighanne Levensaler, and I am a senior advisor with Opportunity at Work. And I am joining you from Alamo, California, over here in the East Bay. I like to say just south of Walnut Creek. I've really been looking forward to this event. The conversation we'll have is critical to helping us build a more equitable future for all those working in the Bay Area, and in ensuring that all our companies in the Bay Area remain competitive. And today's session is intended to be a conversation, so please go ahead and use that chat. We'll do our best to answer questions throughout the session as they come in. I'll try to weave them into the conversation. We're, of course, going to be recording this, and we will email it along to you with some contact information for our speakers today. And speaking of our speakers, today we are super fortunate to have with us a larger panel today, but we wanted to make sure that we include all voices from all different stakeholders. We have employers, representatives, talent partners, a star, and Opportunity at Work. Today I'm honored. I'm going to be joined by Lisa Countryman-Quiroz from JVS, Steve Lee from SkillUp, Arnel Valera, our star panelist, who's at Meta, Bridget Gray from Opportunity at Work, Michael Jones from UCSF, and Kunda Musabuchine, I think I got that right, from DocuSign. And before we hear from these wonderful panelists, I'd just like to take a few minutes with you to share 5 insights. We have a new slide for that. 5 insights from the recent Opportunity at Work Rise with the Stars report. Now, if you have not read that report yet, it is a fantastic report. And I encourage you to spend some time digging in if you have not done so already. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term STARS, it stands for Skilled Through Alternative Routes. So we'll be referring to STARS throughout this session today. So 5 key insights. We've got a second slide for the 5th, and it's a doozy, so required its own slide. If you go back 1 slide for 4 key points, on average, it takes 30 years for a star to earn as much as a BA degree holder that earns on day 1 on the job. That's essentially the value, equating the value of a bachelor's degree at age 18 to 22 to 3 decades of on-the-job learning. And for employers who are seeking vibrant and diverse talent pools, there are more than 1.4 million stars in the Bay Area. That's a huge pool of talent. And in the Bay Area, stars are concentrated in low-income wage occupations, and they have seen their wages stagnate over the past 15 years. And on average, Bay Area stars earn almost 15% less than workers with a bachelor's degree in the same occupation. The last insight that I want to pop out for you is best visualized, so we can move on to that next slide now. Some of the fastest growing, if you move on to the next slide, some of the fastest growing cities in the last 5 years, including San Francisco and San Jose, are still among the lowest performing for stars. So what you're seeing on this visual, it's a little complex, but I'll break it down for you. The visual is showing the performance of metro areas on the STARS Mobility Index. This is a measure that the Opportunity at Work Insights team created in that Rise with the Stars report. And it represents 3 key factors for stars in a given geography. So 1, their earnings ratio relative to the bachelor's degree holders. 2, the percent of stars earning above the median wage. And 3, the percent of stars who make an upwardly mobile job transition each year to a destination job, which offers a 10% wage increase. Now, this entire report, and certainly these stats that I've shared with you here today, give us pause. It should be giving us pause, and are shining a bright light on the flaws that are inherent in our workforce system for stars. And the Bay Area stats are deeply concerning. So I want to bring on our panelists now because I'd like to hear their reaction to these research findings, and again, from their unique perspective. So, hello, welcome everybody joining us. Okay, so Steve, Michael, I'm gonna start with you. How have you seen this impact your world as an employer at UCSF? And why do you think the Bay Area is falling so low on the mobility index?
Thank you for posing that question, Leighanne. And hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here. And Michael Jones from UCSF, and I support our workforce strategy work as it relates to an outside in, inside up strategy, which means supporting our local communities to find access to jobs within the organization and supporting our current team members in finding ways to grow their careers here at UCSF. From a mobility index perspective, when you look at an area such as the Bay Area that has grown rapidly over the last 20 to 30 years, oftentimes with rapid growth comes rapid iteration of practices that may leave out some groups in that process. And we are very keen to what that impact means at our organization as we continue to ensure that we have deep partnerships with the community, such as JVS, who's on this call as well with Lisa, as well as ensuring that those partnerships are not just one-offs, but they're really focused on helping to grow people. So when we see that mobility index, for us, that continues to light up a light bulb for us to say, hey, how do we make sure our partnerships are more purposeful, deep, and create long-lasting impacts on the individuals we want to serve in our communities?
That's fantastic. And Steve, what is your reaction to the research findings at SkillUp? Like, what challenges have you seen Bay Area stars face as they search for opportunities to build their skills and find new opportunities?
It's a great question, Leighanne. First, I want to say just thank you to be part of this august panel. So I would say this is highly unsurprising to me, right? Like for me, and I think for many of us, the fault line of our generation, right, has been income inequality and the K-shaped economy, right? And it's not surprising it's even worse in areas like the Bay Area. And if we're really honest with ourselves, right, even during COVID, those on the upper slope of what I call the K, right, those with college degrees have done even better, where those not on the bottom slope, right, of the K, maybe perhaps stars have only had modest, right, or no wage growth. So this is highly unsurprising to me. And when I think about like SkillUp and our workers, we have access to a lot of workers. And I think what they're telling us, it's kind of like when I'm a baseball fan, right? It's like Yogi Berra used to say, it's like deja vu all over again, right? That is like, where actually are the opportunities that everyone talks about? So our workers are telling us they feel like either maybe they're underqualified, right, for many jobs that everyone says are open to stars, but they're not because they're really going to college grads, or maybe they're overqualified for the jobs employers really want them for, low wage, low end jobs without much room for upward mobility. So all to say, like, I think sometimes stars or, skill up job seekers are stuck, right? And which makes them get frustrated. That makes them doubt themselves. And then when that happens, it's like game over, right? It's like they just sometimes give up, which is why I think we're seeing some of the statistics saying that, there are twice as many job openings as there are unemployed, because I feel like sometimes people feel stuck, right? And so that's kind of what our job seekers are telling us.
That's great. And Lisa, from your perspective, how have you experienced this in your role at JVS? Like, what do you see as some of the most significant hiring challenges in the Bay Area?
Thanks, Leighanne. And I want to thank Steve for mentioning the K-shaped recovery. I haven't heard folks talk about that since like 2020, and it's so critical and it's playing out. We see it everywhere in real estate and commercial real estate. It's playing out everywhere. Just like what Steve was saying, the Bay Area is so deeply bifurcated. And it's been that way for a long time. It's only gotten worse. The pandemic has certainly made it worse. It for a long time has been a headquarter city, and it's the origin site of so many startups. And so there's, just a much greater than normal percentage of companies where the expectation is not just four-year degree, it's elite university. It's, did you go to Stanford or MIT? And so there's very little access into those companies, even when they eliminate that four-year degree requirement. The mindset is just there that, of course, you're just like us. And so it's really, really challenging. You look at a city like Raleigh, I imagine that there's just much more continuity, much more of a clear spectrum from lower skill jobs, middle to high skill jobs and beyond. And so, of course, there would be much more mobility there.
No, absolutely. So Arnell, you're a star, and I'm very curious to hear your reaction to these striking statistics. How have hiring practices impact you personally in your career path before joining Meta?
Just from my perspective, seeing that just seems totally backwards to me. I mean, like the Bay Area is home to all these large companies. And, when I was going to college, I was I was scared that, maybe I won't be able to live up to these expectations of getting this degree. How am I going to approach this a different way? And I think if it wasn't for the wonderful resources such as like Opportunity at Work and, Year Up, I wouldn't know these things, and I wouldn't know how to translate my skills onto my resume to kind of like, get around that sort of degree qualification that all these other jobs are looking for.
And I mean, did you hit, before finding Opportunity at Work and some of those resources, did you hit some, up against some of these barriers yourself?
Yeah, I mean, every interview is different, and at some of these companies, when I would apply, it just seemed I wouldn't even get the opportunity to express myself without an agency or a recruiter, just to back me up on how I am qualified to do these things. I don't even get the chance to reach the interview even, which I feel like is very unfair, and I think could be changed.
Absolutely right. And Bridget, you're so close to this data and your role at Opportunity at Work that we shared up front and is included in the report. How have you experienced this in the various roles you've had in your professional life? What challenges have you seen Bay Area stars face as they try to compete for opportunities like Arnell was just talking about?
Yeah, so I tell everybody I've been in this work for over 20 years, and the thing that's sad, but I have hope that we're still having the same conversations that we had 20, 25 years ago. And so we know that there are some challenges just across the board around access, opportunity, the ability to be able for companies to be able to present opportunities at scale so that stars can find those opportunities and move into those jobs. And so we know the Bay Area has a viability of hiring through alternative routes. But when you start to think about this inclusive hiring in the Bay Area has not reached scale, there are three things you can kind of think about. So there's the employers who it could take 6 to 24 months for them to trust a talent developer. So when you're thinking about them trusting a talent developer that's not a 4-year degree institution, it can take a really long time for them to trust that a talent developer is a trusted recruiting source. And then for talent developers themselves, they're resource constrained. So when you think about all of the effort that they have to put into identifying the in-demand roles, having the individual conversations with employers so that they can help their grads get to jobs, when that trust is not there and they're trying to talk to multiple employers to create that opening and that opportunity, that creates a labor market challenge. And then stars are on the other end of that, feeling frustrated, not being seen, not being able to access these opportunities. So I've seen these conversations happen for 25 years. We're still having them. And I think that the Bay Area has viability to hire stars, but the challenge is the scale and the amount of time it takes to get there is not keeping up with the pace of jobs.
Right, Bridget. So I heard you say, trust in the talent partners who are preparing workers. Given the last few years and sort of the talent, I would say, crisis that we're in, and the desire of companies express public desire to diversify their talent pools, seek new talent pools. Why are we still here? I mean, is there anything more besides just trusting in the sources of preparing, or doing things at scale? It just takes a long time to get there, and are we on the right trajectory? Just want to unpack this problem. Does anybody on the panel have any thoughts on why, given the state of the last few years, we still find ourselves sort of not really tapping into this pool of stars in the way we need to be?
Yeah. So I actually think that when we talk about the trust component of that, the time it takes when you're used to hiring in a very specific process, you're used to using recruiters that you've used forever. Your HR teams are used to using degrees as part of a position description. We understand why those things sit there, because you have so many people applying. if you can use these proxies, you're able to weed people out pretty quickly in order to meet the pipeline. And so I think it's one of those things where if it's new to you, you're now starting to ask questions around, well, how do I make sure that this person has the right skills? How do we make sure we validate those skills? So there's this kind of place where it's like, I don't quite trust this particular recruitment pipeline. But the other thing to think about too is we never ask the questions for college graduates, how do you vet those skills? A person can have a degree. No one ever says, how do I make sure that they have the right skills? How are they validated? And so if we can break down these silos and really have some deep level conversations with employers, because I think employers always want to do the right thing. It's just difficult for them to be able to do it. Change is hard.
Change is hard. Any other thoughts?
Leighanne, can I weigh in on this for a sec?
Yeah.
So I think about behaviors and mindsets a lot, right? And I think about both from the worker perspective, but also the employer perspective. From the worker perspective, we have this saying that we want to help people doubt their own self-doubt. And I think that's actually true. Like, I'd say that people are frustrated sometimes, right? They've gone through the ringer and then they doubt themselves. And how do you change that behavioral norm? It's really, really hard, right? And so we got to unstick that. From the employer side, let's be honest, right? They're risk averse, right? And that becomes a behavior norm. And then when you think about unsticking that behavior norm, it's just really, really hard. And then they also have to think about their own incentives. Like the incentive structure is such that the workers have to be productive, all those kind of things. And it takes a progressive mindset to say, I'm going to take a risk on someone when the bottom line actually means a lot for those folks. So taking that risk is really hard because it's a behavior norm. And then I will also say, like in the real world, corporations work on short term, right? They think about quarterly earnings, all that kind of stuff, right? Where the ability to help folks, rise, it may take a while, right? But the ability to take that time and effort sometimes contradicts like the short-term quarterly earnings stuff. So there's all that going on at the same time with big companies. So I think this behavior stuff is really hard to uncrack, which is why, at least in part, why I think this is really difficult.
I might add too, if you're a hiring manager and you've gotten your requisition approved, that's a big feat in and of itself to get your requisition approved, and you have very specific needs and you needed the person to hit the ground running yesterday. And so you've got that sort of, like very specific tension there too. It's systemic, but it's not, it's just about immediacy of need and a perception around that. I would add that. Okay, so if you're paying attention in the audience, we're down one panelist and he's having some technical challenges. So we're going to bring Kunda on as soon as possible and he'll offer some perspectives. But what I'd like us to do is actually, now that we've characterized and grounded ourselves in the problem when it comes to how we hire, specifically in the Bay Area, I want to talk more about what can be done to solve these issues. So Steve, if you don't mind me sticking with you and Bridget, following immediately on the same question, both of your organizations have come together to tackle this issue in the Bay Area under the Bay Area Opportunity On-Ramps Initiative. Can you just share a little bit more about what that is and your role, for both of you, the role each of the orgs play? Steve, if you'll start off and Bridget follow up.
Of course, I'll first say I love working with Opportunity to Work and Bridget. It's like a dream scenario. So for SkillUp, right? At its core, we're about curated, motivated, diverse talent acquisition into systems that need diverse talent. So think about talent developers who need participants, community colleges need students, employers that need employees, et cetera, right? So how that works in the Bay Area for us specifically is we do four things. First is we market, primarily by digital means, to the population that we care about most, AKA stars. So marketing is first. Second is then we curate once they get to the site. When they get to the site, our product, right? We ask them a few questions that creates a profile, and then that profile gets matched to in-demand pathways that we've identified through labor market analysis as the most sort of in-demand jobs for sustainable wages going forward. And then third, we connect. We connect primarily to like a vetted set of talent developers that we have vetted based on criteria around quality and low cost and short term for specific jobs in the Bay Area. And then lastly, we support. We have a scholarship fund, and we have some coaching services. And how that all operates is then we take these workers and we connect them, right, into Opportunity Works, a back-end employer platform, Stellarworks, so to be the talent developers. And that's where Bridget and team does its work to help folks get jobs. So that's our role is mostly on like the front end, like the talent acquisition, and Opportunity works to maybe in some ways like sort of the last mile connecting to employers. And I'll hand it off to Bridget on that.
Yeah, and so the Bay Area Opportunity On-Ramps, or as we call it, BOW, it launched in April of 2021 as a partnership with SkillUp and JFF, Jobs for the Future, Opportunity at Work, JBS, to unlock hiring for 5,000 stars by 2024. So BOW is really focused on building this workforce infrastructure and connections so that stars have access to be screened into jobs and not screened out because they don't have a 4-year degree. And so, as Steve mentioned, we are there to cultivate and aggregate supply and demand and be able to make sure that employers have access to stars on the Stellarworks platform. Stellarworks is a talent matching platform, and it's 100% for stars. So if you don't have a 4-year degree, Stellarworks is the place where you should be. And employers know that as well. And so there's no, if employers come to Stellarworks, they're intentional. They understand that they're coming there because they're looking for stars and they're looking for folks that don't have a 4-year degree to meet the talent pipeline that they have.
Great. And then Lisa, JBS also part of BOW, talent developer training individuals across the Bay. How are you working with stars to connect them to opportunity? And why are stars the talent pool that employers should look at or give a first or a second look at it?
Great. We do this in a couple of ways. So really, we come with a fundamental mindset that we are meeting job seekers where they are. And there's kind of 2 strategies that we use to do that. In the first case, we focus on training that is executed in very, very close partnership with employers. So we call that career pathways training. And on the other side, we're focused on helping job seekers navigate their job search. So in the case of, job seekers who have some skills, they have, they're stars, they're already coming with skills, but they don't have a 4-year degree. We really focus on helping them navigate that job search, understand which kind of opportunities they can connect with, polish their materials, practice their interview skills, but most importantly, build their confidence and their resilience. I really resonated with what Steve was saying. When anyone's going through a job search, there's so much rejection to be endured and frustration and a seeming hopelessness to it. And so we provide not only kind of access to that navigation and that skills set, but also community. So we do this in cohort, in community. And then in the career pathways side, we work with fantastic employers like UCSF, and we work together to create training and then connect job seekers with great opportunities. So why should employers think about working with stars? A lot of employers are complaining about the fact that they can't hire enough talent right now. And by now we have the proof points to show that there's a huge advantage to working with stars. So there are several employers with whom we've been working in close partnership for years. And at first, it's true, those employers were, a little concerned about some of the folks that we were bringing in, and they were not sure that they were the right fit because they were coming with their old mindset. But as we worked more closely with them, and like Bridget said, built trust, they began to see that they needed to really widen their aperture in terms of who they thought could be a good employee. Now, what is the outcome of that? With one employer, we know that we have reduced turnover in that job classification from 25%, which it used to be, which meant that they were spending a ton of time hiring, onboarding, training. We've reduced that down to 8% in that job classification. With another employer that we work with closely for years, their overall turnover is about 11%. And with the folks that we bring in, the turnover is just about 3%. So there's a huge financial advantage to working with trusted partners and doing that through a collaborative like BOW in order to reduce those costs that they might be not looking at up front, but has a big long-term impact.
That is fantastic, especially, we're we're in the great resignation, reshuffle, not sure where we are right now, but we've been in that. A lot of companies are thinking differently about how and where they source their talent, how they develop their talent as a result. Retention obviously is top of mind. So at UCSF, Michael, you built a program to explicitly source individuals without college degrees. Can you tell us more about what you're doing and why you're doing it and how it's going?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity once again. And I can't take credit for actually building the program. It's called our Anchor Initiative. And so, to what a lot of our panelist members have already said, it takes for organizations to be very intentional and look at this problem as an organizational issue and not just a job role or classification issue. When you begin to look at the entire organization as the areas for improvement that we could really make some changes, you begin to see that some of the times it's around policies that are in place that never really got questioned. It's around practices and in terms of what we're expecting from our team members in order to bring people into the organization. So from a healthcare perspective, what we've done is we've looked at what is critical and core to our belief, and that is ensuring that we are able to provide quality healthcare no matter to whom or where we are able to deliver it. So when you look at the Bay Area, we understand that to have a quality life, a good life expectancy, that oftentimes reflect back on how much you're able to earn, the access you're able to have to certain things like healthcare, and just really a good way of life. And when you start to think about it in terms of what your organization can do, and it doesn't have to be healthcare, it could be anything that you're specializing in, you begin to see that you can begin to move certain pillars to really start to directly look at workforce strategies. For example, we have started several partnerships with JVS and other groups across the city to not only bring individuals into the organization through our Excel program, but we've also created training pathways for medical assistants. And we've done that externally as well as internally. Now, oftentimes when you think about these pathways is to get someone into a job. That's great for today, for tomorrow, for maybe the next year or next 3 years. What we're thinking of is what happens in 5 to 10 years for that next opportunity. How do we ensure that we're mapping your strengths based on competencies and not based on a slew of really shiny things that you could put on your resume, but truly based on competencies? Where are you in your career and what can we do to assist you in getting to that point? Before we could really make that workforce strategy really strong, all organizations, I think it's imperative that we take a step back and map the resources that are within our areas, whether it be external or internal, right? Who are your partners? What are they good at? How do you lean on those partners more, right? So not everyone is going to be great at mentoring your new hires who are struggling with their first 30, 60, 90 days. And how do you find partners that could help you with those things? How do you ensure that you're partnering with your philanthropic groups across the city to drive revenue and funds into other areas to support what you need to see happen for your team members and community members? And then also, which might seem like a bit of a tangent to some people, is looking at the workforce more expansively outside of your own organization. When you begin to think of where your staff come from, they come from all around the communities that surround your organization, or they may be dispersed. And so when you think about that, how do you begin to move levers like procurement and your investment strategies, right? So who do you buy lunch from? Something as simple as that. How are you supporting those businesses around your organization? Because in your support, they're now able to hopefully hire more individuals from some of these groups and categories that may be overlooked. And how do you support that decision-making process or encourage your partners to begin to think more expansively about what hiring truly means? And so when we begin to hire individuals through the community and through our partnership, we want to ensure that you're not just here for that first role and that's it. We want to ensure that we're putting you on a path to a long-term successful career with UCSF.
I love that. And I definitely want to get into career mobility a little bit more. Just maybe a tactical question, but how have you changed the upfront candidate support and the screening process so that we are bringing in stars and more diverse candidates and getting them in there to ultimately mobilize and be part of a vibrant career? How are you doing that?
Absolutely. Great question. And so Steve added something to the first part of that strategy, which was marketing. I think there is a huge part of marketing and being very intentional about how we drive direct marketing to community partners in specific areas that we would love to see more candidacy from. And also being mindful that on the flip side, we have to continue building our internal team's awareness about what it truly means to have a candidate that doesn't have a bachelor's degree but has equivalency. So if you look at a lot of the jobs on our website now, you will see oftentimes where there is a line that says or equivalent. That is no longer just something that's just typed into a job description and posted online. UCSF, we're very intentional about ensuring that that or equivalent is actually a part of your review process. We've also created internal dashboards to help us better see where referral sources are coming from. We were we were lucky to be able to start using Stellarworks last year and to post jobs and to continue sourcing. But I think from a tactical perspective, you have to do a lot of inference and just really think about what are we doing as an organization? How knowledgeable is my team about the skills that we may be missing on the table because we are looking at the check boxes? And I can say that the team here at UCSF, I'm very proud to work alongside them because we've continually looked at that or equivalent and ensure that we are really moving people into the organization when we can.
I think even just challenging and training people on unpacking or equivalent, what that means, it's an important part of the behavioral change for the organization. Just the simple asking and unpacking of that. You mentioned Stellarworks. Bridget, would you be so kind as to share with the broader audience who are unfamiliar with Stellarworks just a little bit more about that?
Yes, I'm happy to talk about Stellarworks. So Stellarworks is a talent matching skills-based platform. It's not a jobs board. We want to make sure that Stellarworks is a place where employers see a continual space of connecting with stars and understanding the skills and the talents that they bring to the table. And so there's a skills-based matching algorithm. Employers post their positions, stars publish their profiles, and in talent developers invite their stars to the platform. Talent developers also create profiles, and when they do that, they upload their curriculum. So skills are pulled from the training tracks. And so matching those with what the employer is putting in their position description, this algorithm does this matching, and it matches a star to an employer's job. And so again, we want to make sure that this is not a jobs board. It is a place where we can see actual progression and continuation. So a star gets their first role and they've been in that role for a while. We want to see them accessing to get their second job and their third job. And we want to be able to see that economic mobility move into a space that we call destination jobs. When you start to see that 70, 80, 90,000, the things that Michael talked about from a health perspective, the full benefits, the things that make people feel really whole when they have employment. And so Stellarworks is right now is by invitation only. And so employers get an opportunity to know that there are actual talent developers. So when we talk about that trust factor, this is a great way to build that trust with talent developers because you're pulling your talent from a platform and you know where this talent is coming from. So you can have repeat business in thinking about how you recruit stars into open positions.
I love that. And just thinking about mobility and promotion rates and ensuring that companies are paying attention to that overall experience, the sort of longitudinal look at that. I think Stellarworks is such a powerful partner or enabler of those strategies companies have. So our star on the all-star panel, we have a star on the all-star panel. There are a lot of employers in the audience right now listening or who will listen to this recording that are thinking about building a pathway for stars. So what are some of the things that your sponsor, Russell at Meta, did to set you up for success in the interview and in hiring process? What would you want the audience to know about stars and your journey as you landed your amazing new role, or not new role, but role?
Yeah, sure. Well, just for background, just growing up, my family didn't have a lot of money. And on top of that, I also wasn't very prolific in school. And then once I, graduated from high school and went on to college, I was aimlessly looking for these classes, trying to find what I was passionate about. And it wasn't until I joined, programs such as Year Up and discovering things like Opportunity at Work and all these wonderful things that everyone here is doing, I realized there's this feeling in my heart that I wanted to be able to do something without having to prove people I have to do it a certain way. And once I was able to fully realize this, it just came down to a matter of taking the skills that I currently have, even from my minimum wage jobs. I now realize there are skills there. There are principal skills there that definitely are transferable, even to my role today as a recruiting coordinator. There's public speaking, in customer service. There's plenty of asset coordination that's done in retail. All these things. It's just, but at the beginning, it's hard to realize you're doing these things. You feel like you're doing this minimum wage job. You're not doing much work of yourself, but really you are. And it's just self-assessing these sort of skills and transferring them onto a resume so that employers can understand, oh, they do have these sort of skills. They can do these things and just in a different environment. And what Russell Tobin and Meta successfully did for me is they were just very, very thorough with what was to be expected during the interview process and just clearing all my doubts about what the interview questions were going to be, how would I approach them, and how I can relate them to past experiences. And also had very encouraging interviewers, very open-minded, very comfortable communication with me, and I'm very engaging. I didn't feel like I was just another person ready to get denied. They actually went through the process of talking to me and understanding what I'm about, and walking me through that sort of interview that before all these experiences I've had, I never would have known.
Right, and as you're, in talent acquisition role and recruiting coordinator role now, how do you think about your own career mobility and trajectory, about aligning and transferring and aligning those skills that you're developing into new roles? Does that kind of give you a different edge, do you think? And how do you use that and then share that with others?
I think I just hope my message comes across to other stars out there that feel like as I mentioned earlier, I know a lot of people, especially my colleagues and people I went to school with previously, they think they're in dead-end jobs, but really they're actually just honing their skills and things that they don't know are transferable into these other roles just because it has a big fancy name on top of it, like Meta or Airbnb. I just hope that a lot of these ideologies get realized on a mainstream level. It's definitely what some others here have said. It's sort of a confidence thing and a lot of just self-realizing and self-evaluating. What am I doing and how can these things be translated into these jobs? I just hope everyone has a lot more confidence. And seeing this, I hope they feel, okay, there is opportunities out there for me. I just have to do the research and hopefully get reached out by these people.
That's fantastic. Steve, I'm just curious from your perspective, what is one thing an employers should do to find star talent for their open roles today? Like,
oh gosh, there's a lot they can do. So first and foremost, I think they need to listen to Lisa, my friend Lisa. When she says that companies, dropout rates have fallen by 2/3 and 3/4, like listen to that, because you got to take sometimes you got to take a bit of a risk, right? Let's be honest, right? And let's really be honest. I love our Bayo employers, UCSF, Workday, they're awesome. But to do this at scale, right, requires a different mindset. So listen to Lisa as my first point, right? Second, Michael made a really good point around contracts and bidding processes. That's worth billions of dollars in the Bay Area, trillions of dollars across the country. And you can embed those things into contracts and bids and things of that sort. That's really, really important. And the last thing I say has nothing to do with employers is I sometimes think the only way things really change is policy, right? So I think ban the box, right? That, around folks in the criminal justice, that's actually had an impact. But that took 40 years, right, to get from criminal justice reform back in the 70s into ban the box in the 2000s. Like, to me, so it's hard to do, but I think in some ways we need some of that. But at the very least, listen to Lisa, right? Take a little some risks, listen to Michael, and when he talks about bidding, that's a start, right? And then we can build from there. Those would be my thoughts, Leighanne.
And Lisa, anything to add? We're all listening to you. Anything to add there that just extend on what you said?
I feel so affirmed by Steve. I love that. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, you know, it's perhaps a shocking stat, but nationally, employers have reduced their time in training by 90% since the 70s. So invest in your workers. Part of that is thinking differently about who you're bringing on. And another part is thinking differently about how you're onboarding and advancing people. You can dramatically reduce turnover. You can dramatically increase the innovative potential of your workforce once you increase the diversity among your workforce. And someone here, I think it may have been Steve, was talking about short-sightedness and short-term thinking. We really have to bust out of that. You know, the corporate norm today is sink or swim, which is rooted in kind of a meritocracy perspective. And we can make no progress on equity if we stay stuck in that 20th century thinking.
Can I add one thing, Leighanne, if you don't mind? So I'm a bit of a cynic when it comes to employers, right? So sometimes you got to look in the mirror, right? And if all the rhetoric around these acronyms around DEI and ESG and CSR, right? You hear these things, right? If you're really honest about it, then do something about it, right? As opposed to just rhetoric, because rhetoric sells in the PR world, but it doesn't help stars. Like, so let's get off the rhetoric. Let's listen to Lisa and Michael, and let's actually get blank done. Sorry.
I'd love to jump in there if I can. I don't know if that's okay, Leighanne.
Of course, yeah.
From a used to be a cynic that's not a cynic anymore, I think about it in this way. So I've worked with a lot of employers. I've seen employers, like companies, actually change. And I think that the first thought to me is, before we can even get to the place of asking an employer to post a position on Stellarworks or to start to rebuild their position descriptions, there has to be actually an internal culture shift that happens first. So the first thing realistically is you have to think about the talent. So Steve is right. Acronyms like DEI mean nothing if you think about them from an initiative. Initiatives have end dates. So you're like, we have a DEI initiative, so we got to check that box. No, DEI is paramount to our culture. And so we have to make sure we're changing that. So there's a couple of things. One, oftentimes when I've worked with employers, it's the executive level that's setting these new processes and structures or saying we need to do this thing. But that doesn't trickle down to hiring managers. It doesn't trickle down to frontline staff. So you have to make sure that the entire company is aligned in what the goal is. The second thing is, when you're thinking about position descriptions, it's important for employers to understand that stars will self-select out when they see certain things in a position description. So if a position description, and I'm not picking on you, Michael, I just want to be really clear, but a position description can say a bachelor's degree or equivalent. All they're going to see is that bachelor's degree, and they're going to self-select out because they're not going to go to the equivalent. And so that in itself says, this employer wants someone with a bachelor's degree, but if I have 10 years of experience, which, just let's think about that for a second. Now you're putting an even bigger hurdle up. And so we have to be really, really intentional about how position descriptions are built. The third thing is the mindset. So when people think about non-degree talent, there's a deficit that pops in their mind immediately about the individual on the other end. They think about, what else will I have to do? What type of barriers are they coming in the doors with? How am I supposed to onboard them? What level of training will I have to do? And the reality is, stars are no different from anyone else. And they all come to the table with a very unique set of skills. There may be some stars that have to upskill, just like there's some college graduates that have to upskill. And so that mindset really has to shift first. And people have to understand, like, what is it we're actually looking for? When all those boxes are checked, then you can come to Stellarworks and post a position. We'll be happy to have you.
Yeah, and if I could add something, Leighanne, if that's okay. So I do not think you're picking on us by any chance. And you know what? I think it's important, first and foremost, for every company on this call, every individual, self-reflection is key. We have a great organization here at UCSF, but we can't continue to be great or get even better if we always think we're great. There are areas that we have to acknowledge that we're not strong in, and we need partnership. We need guidance. We need people who know what they're doing to be in the organization. And so that honesty is first and foremost, because I think that allows you to have a more systematic approach. And then that leads for me into the DE&I piece. Oftentimes when you hear DE&I, the word community, you hear all these things, words thrown around, and to some organization, it may seem impossible to incorporate this. But I will tell you that oftentimes you already have all the levers in place to actually execute DEI strategies. You already have great talent teams that are bringing in great people, and they could certainly just look at what some of those practices are to be more efficient in bringing in more talent that meets your DE&I goal. You already have a great procurement team by chance. You probably have a great team of individuals that are volunteering and supporting certain causes. You can really tie that in. And where I'm going with that is that when you start to look at that from a data perspective, you begin to see that not only do I have the tools internally to drive my ESG or DEI strategy, but I have a good understanding of what's available in my labor market. And that's, I think, where you, as an organization, drive the discussion about how do I begin to hire more within a specific category or group. When you begin to look at the real regional data, you may at times see that you're oversaturated and you have enough talent in certain areas, or you may see that you're not enough saturated and you really need to think more about how your job descriptions are written. And to Bridgette's point, when you write that job description, are you thinking about the end audience? As with any great marketing company will tell you, you have to think about how the audience will receive it. Just because you're the one writing it doesn't mean that it sounds great for everyone. And I do understand that some of our organizations have bargaining units and other groups in place where we are building these things collaboratively. But where there are opportunities, really think about what that job description means. In addition, a lot of us have invested in our learning and development teams at our organization. We have a fantastic L&OD team here at UCSF. And so if you're investing in your L&OD teams and you're bringing on people that maybe have 80% of what you're looking for, and you could train them in that additional 10 to 20% that they need, leverage your internal teams that are doing great training work, using LinkedIn Learning, using other tools to help people get that skill that they need for your specific roles and tasks. So I think oftentimes when we think about the equity work that needs to happen, it may seem larger than your organization, but really we all have a great part to play, and we can really be specific in how our organization drive that change.
Yeah, one of the topics that has been mentioned here a couple of times is upskilling and the importance of that. I think it could unlock our emphasis on upskilling now as companies through an ecosystem play, not through just in-house, but to do it through partners, upskilling, where we're going to have to upskill our entire workforce just to keep pace with all of the change every few years for some job families and roles. That really, we're all kind of, it's a great equalizer in a lot of ways. And if we can really think about weaving together upskilling with this, with our sourcing strategy and thinking through that not as I have to build a big corporate university a la the 1980s again, but rather I can rely on an ecosystem of partners to help me with this, sort of our talent supply and our talent life cycle. I think there's a lot that holds a lot of promise for us. But to everybody's point, there are things we can do absolutely today. We have everything we need today. We don't need to wait for that. But I am optimistic for the future as we reimagine upskilling in this new world. Okay, so we have some audience questions. So thank you. And people have been commenting in the chat. Probably not going to have time to get to all of them, but one of the themes is how the stigma associated with people without bachelor's degrees. And we had mentioned at the top, it's pretty acute here in the Bay Area where we have candidates that have degrees from, I think all universities are prestigious, but we have a wealth of talent with high level degrees here in the Bay Area. So how do we break through that? What are some ways that we can change the narrative, especially for employers, and make the case for unique value that stars can offer. Michael, would representing an employer, can I start with you on that?
Sure, absolutely. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier is looking at competencies, right? So mapping competencies to the role that needs to happen. So I could share that when we start to look at people leaders, so managers, directors, etc., we go through a full process of not only looking at, did you check all the boxes to the job description, but we also have internal review boards that are not necessarily HR people. And why that's important is that it helps us to look beyond just the HR qualifications. It begins to look at other things like, can this person really lead a team, right? Is this person going to empower their team to continue to grow and maybe actually leave their department to do something else at the organization? And so there is a review body outside of HR, in partnership with HR, of course, but that does that process so that the final hiring decision is not always up to HR and the hiring manager. When we begin to look at stars and individuals that are coming into the organization in other means, once again, really looking at the competencies that they're bringing more so than the schools that they went to. Because we're the second largest employer outside of the government in the Bay Area, we have 33,000 staff. And I could tell you that we are a very diverse and mixed group of qualified and educated individuals, whether it be, hey, I have education from a high school level and I have 20 years of really technical, good experience, versus I'm a new grad and I have 1 day of experience. And so we have actually put that into practice. And I think you could actually see that in our own data in terms of how we hire and are able to promote people. But that's a really important point, Leighanne, that you mentioned about schools that tend to get much more recognition than others. That certainly will get you notified or noticed, of course, when you apply. But it is not our final decision maker. It's about the competencies that you can match. And I think also what's important, and it may not always be able to happen in every single situation, but it's the advocacy piece. It's the partnership with Jewish Vocational Services when they say, hey, we have candidates that applied. No one gets special privileges, but to know that if we rejected Michael today and we said Michael needed help with resume writing, we could provide some information back to that partner and say, hey, the next go around when Michael applies, this is where I think Michael fell short. And so having that advocacy is really key. Of course, you may not be able to do that at scale in every single situation, but I think that's a important aspect of weeding out the selectivity when you see certain names. And I do not want to discount the fact that of course, everyone works hard for any technical or educational training that they go through, and it should be acknowledged, but it should not also be the final say-so in whether or not you get that job.
I love that. Lisa, thoughts on how do we think about reducing the stigma, changing the narrative with people without degrees?
Yes, I liked several of the points that Michael just made, and I do think that there's sort of a stacking dimension to it, right? There's building the systems that create that connectivity, which is what the BOW project is all about. There's building those really trusting relationships with employers, and especially with large employers, right? Where once you begin to shift the mindset, shift the practices, that cascades out in a much, much bigger way. And again, always data is critical to be able to show that it really pays off. And, some folks are going to be more sold by the individual story or having that one amazing candidate that might totally change it for them. And a lot of other folks are going to be sold on the data. And so I think both strategies are powerful selling points.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a final slide with a few call to actions, depending on where you sit as a stakeholder around this opportunity. There are, what we really want people to, I think, employers to consider is how do we bring in stars? How do we change our practices? We talked a lot about that today to ensure that we can tap into as vibrant and as high quality of a talent pools as possible to help our organizations, to help our businesses run. And for that, we're advocating for competency-based or skills-based hiring approaches, sourcing and hiring approaches, among other things today. So I appreciate that. And I think we're maybe one slide back with some call to actions. you don't mind. Oh, maybe not. Okay, if you fast forward there. Well, I'm afraid that we have come, unfortunately, to the end of our time today. We are so very grateful for these panelists. We had a larger group, and I hope you enjoyed as much as I did the various perspectives that were brought to the table today. Thank you for sharing your experiences and powerful solutions. I love the solution orientation today. For those of you who've been participating with us, we're going to email contact information and links following the event. And I'd just like to thank you as an audience for joining us. If you're an employer, we just encourage you to put skills first and hire stars. And I hope you have a beautiful rest of the day and week. So thank you so much from all of us.